Why is it important for screenwriters to know about selling their screenplay before they sit down and write their screenplay?
Oh, that's a really smart and a really great question. So part of it is, again, that as much as we would love this scenario that someone would read our pilot script and say, yes, and write a check and make it, that just almost never happens. The best case scenario is someone reads the script and then they're going to meet with you and they're going to want to ask you questions. And the script is proving the concept. It's proving the characters, that you know how to write characters and these are really compelling characters, and that it's a compelling world and there's an engine. So they know this thing has potential, but they're going to really want to know about the first year. Because every production company has had an experience early on of buying a pilot script that they loved, and then when they tried to develop it, no one can figure out how to get a season or multiple seasons of a show. So in the past several years, I know very few writers, including highly established writers, who haven't gone through the following experience: that with a pitch or a spec script, they'll end up in a room with multiple executives and they're going to ask a lot of questions about the first season. They're going to want to know, what are we watching in the first season? They're going to want to make sure that there is a compelling first season. Now, some executives are going to want to see a breakdown of every episode. Other executives are just going to want to see some big arcs. Other executives are just going to want to get a big high-level picture to know that there's a first season, and they really want to know what's the main thing we're going to be watching. So in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, there's several things we're watching over the first season, but the main thing that we're watching is the Marvelous Miss Maisel going from being a housewife who's very kind of a very private person to becoming a stand-up comic, putting in the work to be a stand-up comic. That's the main thing, not the only thing, the main thing we're going to be watching in the first season. In Fleabag season 2, the main thing we're going to be watching is Fleabag relentlessly pursuing having sex with this priest. Other things are going on but that's the main through line. They want to know what the main through line and the main thing that they're going to be watching. And the reason you want to figure that out before you write your pilot is twofold. First of all, so after you write your pilot, when you get pulled into these meetings, you have a really smart answer. But secondly, remember, your pilot launches the first season. So if the first season is Fleabag pursuing this priest, or Mrs. Maisel doing the work to become a stand-up comic, that needs to be launched in the pilot. So by the time we're done with the pilot episode, Fleabag is pursuing that priest, and we know why she's doing it, and we are absolutely enthralled with seeing how that plays out. And at the end of the pilot episode of The Marvelous Miss Maisel, we're like, oh, the last woman in the world who would ever do stand-up comedy. A woman who's just terrified and lives her life where she can never be rejected. She's the perfect wife, she's the perfect daughter, she's the perfect friend, so no one would ever reject her. She's going to try to be a stand-up comic in the 1950s when women aren't allowed to be stand-up comics, especially the way that she wants to do it, which is the Lenny Bruce style. So at the end of that, we have to be in love with seeing her on stage and going, I want to go on that journey. So if you don't know your first season, and you don't know how you're going to sell it, you don't know how to do a pilot. People will come to me for a consultation, and I'll read their pilot, and I'll start asking them about the first year. They can't answer me. That would be like going to someone and saying, I wrote the first scene of a feature script. Will you read it? Is that the right first scene for my feature? And you say, well, I don't know. What is your feature? Where does it go? And they say, oh, I don't know. I just got the first scene. That is why pilots are so tricky. There are a lot of writers who can write on shows that have been structured, and they're amazing, but they can't create a successful pilot. A pilot works on double dimensions. So first of all, the pilot episode has to pull in strangers, make them absolutely want to keep reading, relentlessly make us want to keep reading, then deliver us to an ending that exceeds our expectations. A beginning, a middle, and end, a self-contained story. Additionally, the pilot is the beginning of a larger story, which is season 1. Season 1 is the beginning of the series, but let's just talk about season 1. So a pilot launches the first season. So if you don't know the first season, if you don't know the engine and you don't know the concept, and you don't know how you're going to sell this in the room, then you don't know what the right pilot episode is. Because the pilot episode is not the first thing we're going to be watching necessarily on the show. It is a selling document to get people excited to want to meet with you. You write the pilot so you can pitch the show. You write the pilot to prove the concept and the characters and the world and the story, and then you pitch the show. So it's absolutely essential in TV that people understand how they're selling the show, where it's going to be positioned, the engine, the concept, what's going to happen in the first year, because that will lead them to know the right way to design and execute on their pilot.
So I'm thinking of, like, let's say Judd Apatow's This Is 40, which was just hilarious. If I were to then pitch that, and it's a masterpiece for that 2 hours, whatever it was, but then I don't know where there's going to be continuations of that story. I don't know what's going to keep happening over and over again. Same thing with, like, let's say Meet the Fockers. I know there's been, 3 films about that, like Little Fockers and hilarious again. But how am I going to turn that, how many Christmas dinners can I have where something goes wrong over and over and over again? So it's got to be something where there's going to be, and I guess that's where the engine comes into play. But there's going to be like a continuous. So somebody going to do stand-up night after night in the 50s when they could be shut down by law enforcement or whatever, that there's going to be incidents over and over and over again to test that show. Whereas a Christmas dinner, a family birthday party, that's hilarious, but it just goes wrong. I need to have something more.
Right, and you mentioned Judd Apatow. So if Judd Apatow or Vince Gilligan or Genji Cohen come in and they have a pilot, they probably already have the show figured out. But if they didn't, much more likely that someone will say, "You'll figure it out. We'll take that. We'll take that ride with you." But if you're not yet have that track record, it's ridiculous to think that someone's going to invest the money and go on that ride with you. So again, it's so important. And I don't know, I have a lot of students or former students who sell a lot of original material, and they always start figuring out the season 1 and then back into the pilot.
Okay.
It's sort of like figure out your screenplay, then figure out how to open it.
Oh, interesting. Establish who those characters are, their personality.
And where it's going and what makes it interesting, so that's what the pilot has to really prove that this has somewhere to go and it's going to be really interesting to people. And going from a pilot to a season it's not impossible, but it's a much lower probability, harder way to do it.
Right. So with Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, just knowing all of the characters that are in stand-up comedy world and clubs and frequenting and all, all the hecklers and things. So there's so many opportunities to back that character in to an interesting
That's
story.
certainly part of it.
Right. Whereas a family dinner and, somebody insults an in-law, that can only go so far, kind of thing.
That's
as a full TV show.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the difference between a feature and a TV show.
Got it. Okay, great.